Hi, I'm Jennifer from Shabby Fabrics. We're continuing our binding series. This is how to bind around scallops. Now, this is one of the more challenging parts of binding, but I love the look of scallops, curves. That's where a bias binding is absolutely not an option. It's essential. What is it about bias that makes it preferable over cutting your strips across the width of the fabric or down the length of the fabric? And that's because fabric that's cut on the bias, on the 45 degrees, has stretch. So, in fact, let me show you. This is our binding for today. And this is just a width of fabric cut. And look, it really doesn't have that much stretch. This fabric, same fabric, instead of cutting up width of the fabric, we simply angled the ruler and cut our strips this way. Look at all of the stretch this has, which is necessary to go around these curves. Now, I've complicated my life even further by having a stripe now that I have to match. I have to slice these binding strips as it is to make a longer binding strip, but I also have a stripe I'm dealing with. So I'm just going to show you two things today: how to splice a bias strip that also has a pattern repeat to deal with. Now, if I had something such as this is not that big of a deal. You'll simply cut your strips on bias on the 45 and join them just like I've showed you in our very first part of our binding video series. Nothing special about that. It's a simple little joint here. Let's see. Nothing unique about that. Splice on the 45, fold it in half. But now I've got a stripe 2 to deal with. So let me show you, when I showed you on a previous video how to do a butt joint when the stripe is not on bias. When it is on bias, different ball game altogether. So let's bring our pressing mat over. This technique is something I've kind of taught myself, I guess, over the years, because I really don't like it when binding strips don't line up. I don't want a visual break of, oh, there's one binding strip and there's another binding strip, because they're so misaligned. It's very obvious where one ended and one started. I like it to be where it looks like it's one continuous piece of fabric. So in this case, when I visually look at this, of course, I don't want my binding strips spliced to look like this. I want them to be lined up, as I mentioned, so you really cannot tell where the break is from one strip to the other. That takes a little bit of planning. And what I've learned is, if I fold my fabric over anywhere, let's say I just pick here, where I'm going to parallel. I'm going to fold that over, so I am not just in any direction, but I'm paralleling the side of that stripe. I'm right alongside of it, and I'm going to put a fold in there. Okay. I now know that I need to pick up, I need to join, let me in fact be in that section right about here. I need to join, nope, because we need to have these strips be continuous. So let's see, right in about is that position going to do it? You have to finesse this. So let's move that over even more. You have to finesse this to find that sweet spot. You press a new area. Okay. So you can see right there is a good place to join that. Maybe I can scoot down so I'm not wasting as much of that strip. Right there is a good spot. Now, I am just going to hold that steady. Open this up. Pin this and pin it well so it does not move. Take this to my sewing machine and we're going to sew down that line. And before we cut anything, we're going to make sure that nothing shifted. It's going to look exactly the way we want it to. see what we've got. It's always like a surprise. Did it actually work? So looks like we got lucky this time. Our efforts paid off because, as you can see when I open this up, you now cannot tell where that joint is, and that's exactly what I had hoped for. So I'm going to take this here, press this good and open here. Look at it one more time, make sure I don't want to make any adjustments. How would I make an adjustment? Simply seam rip and start again. But I'm very happy with that. I cannot tell where one strip begins and another strip ends. Again, if you were using a solid fabric or one that it's not that big of a deal, they don't have to really match a pattern, it's much simpler. I love candy cane stripes on Christmas quilts, so this is what I deal with a lot. It's a lot of the binding you'll see on my Christmas quilts because I just think that swirling stripe is so cute. It's so Christmassy. Okay, so I would challenge someone to find where that joint is. I think we've done a good job. Now, like before, wrong sides together. Go ahead and press. So the only difference to preparing bias binding to a width of fabric strips for your binding or length of fabric is that you're cutting them on the 45. This is just because of the fact that I now added a stripe to that because I like stripes, that I had to also deal with matching a repeat. But again, the binding is kind of the finish of the quilt. Take the time. Take the time. Okay, you get the idea that I'm going to press this all the way down. Now, in previous videos, you have two different options for how you start the binding. If you're going to do the twisty or hidden binding, as I've called it, you would trim this to be flush. If you're going to do kind of the envelope start, where the end of it kind of tucks back in, either way, I like to just kind of square this off and kind of start again. All right. So if you're going to do the twisty where it's hidden, you're going to just start sewing and leave this flap open. If you want to do the envelope start, you're going to have this flap, secure that, come to about here, and then continue sewing. That's not the gist of this. The gist is how to deal with the valleys of a scallop. So I'm just going to go for the twisty method and leave this flap open. If you're doing a scallop quilt, do not start this in the valley. Oh my goodness, don't do that. At least get it on top of one of the scallops. So I'm going to start up here. All right. Now you can pin, or you can just very carefully work your way around this. This is a time-consuming process, so take your time, make sure you have ample free time to do this. Watch how I work in a very small section, stretching the fabric as necessary. One thing I want to mention to you too is notice how the valleys of these scallops are pretty profound. You can make your life a little simpler by kind of shallowing those out. The more succinct the change is, the more difficult that valley is to negotiate. So if you are a little intimidated by this, you might want to kind of shallow that out, so it's a lot easier to kind of just negotiate. So let me keep going. I'm not going to change what I've got here. I've got a pretty strong valley in here, and I will just show you how I sew that on. Couple different techniques I've seen. First off, I'm going to start with a needle down. Some people actually do a little tuck in there. What I mean by that is some people will come in here and they'll actually lift this up and almost make a pivot. I like to try to straighten out my fabric. I like to make the pivot out here, right? Because I'm trying to, I don't really want to tuck. I try to make that out here. Then as I'm going, I can start relaxing the fabric that's off to my left. All right, and I just keep working my way around. Notice how the fabric just moves with me. It just, I can really navigate this anywhere I want it to go. That's why you created the bias. You would not be able to do this nearly as easily with straighter grain binding. All right, let's finish that up real quick. I just want you to see what this is going to look like. We can just trim that away for now. Okay. So you see how that created that? And remember how I kind of just pulled that around. So I was coming around. As I got here, I just kind of brought up my quilt and tried to make it like it's straight. Now this is like this. So from behind, I just rolled that edge over like I would. And I got that right. Normally when I open those up, it's totally upside down there everywhere on my table. So you're just going to bring your wonder clips in here, or pins, or whatever you're doing. And when you get in that valley, see that? And you come out of that valley. It's really not a big deal, and it's so cool to do a scallop. We also have the scallop vines and wave. I think it's called scallop vines and waves ruler, which is wonderful. I used to create these actually with the saucepan lids, and then they came out with the scallops vines and waves ruler. I love it, and that's what I use now. But look how this looks. See, that's all there is to creating a bias binding that can accommodate going around even a very sharp valley of a scallop quilt. So be sure to subscribe. So there's more tips and tricks coming with binding and many other techniques as well.